Hello everyone, and welcome to my CBS Wonderful Today channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. To Youthful and the Restless spoilers. Victor reveals Claire's true identity. Victoria breaks down after reading the DNA results. The atmosphere inside Newman Enterprises was heavy, the kind of silence that pressed down on the casket and made breathing feel like a conscious trouble. Bottom-to-ceiling windows framed the familiar Genoa city skyline, but no bone was esteeming the view. Every soul in the administrative conference room was locked into the same waiting game, a verity long buried, now clawing its way to the face. Victor Newman sat at the head of the table, his hands folded, his expression sculpted from gravestone. This was the look his family knew too well, the look that meant commodity irrevocable was about to be. Not a business preemption. Not a commercial treason. Commodity far more particular. Victoria stood near the window, arms crossed tightly around herself as if bracing against an unseen storm. She hadn't slept. Not really. The last 48 hours had been nothing but fractions of recollections, questions she no way allowed to ask, and a growing dread she couldn't shake. Nearly deep outside, she formally tasted it. Whatever Victor was about to say would change everything. Claire sat on the contrary side of the room, nervously twisting her fritters together. She looked calm on the face, but her eyes betrayed her fear. For weeks now, she had felt like a mystification piece that didn't relatively fit anywhere. Questions about her history, her relinquishment, the circumstances girding her birth, all of it had started to feel too coincidental, too close to the Newman root to be arbitrary. Nick leaned against the table, glancing between Victoria and Claire, apprehension etched across his face. Nikki sat beside Victor, her posture rigid, lips pressed tightly together. She knew. She had known before the test was indeed ordered. And that knowledge was tearing her piecemeal. Eventually, Victor cleared his throat. Enough waiting, he said, his voice low but commanding. This family has lived with secrets for far too long. Victoria turned sprucely. Dad, if this is another one of your power plays. This has nothing to do with business, Victor intruded. This is about blood. About heritage. About the verity. He slid a manila envelope onto the table. Thick. Official. Necessary. The DNA test results came in this morning, Victor continued. I had them vindicated. Doubly. Claire's breath caught. Vindicated against who? Victor's aspect. Locked onto her. Against Victoria. The room set. Victoria shook her head, a nervous laugh escaping before she could stop it. That's not funny. Victor didn't blink. I'm not joking. Nikki closed her eyes. Nick uncurled. Dad, what are you saying? Victor stood, sluggishly, designedly. I'm saying that Claire Grace isn't who we believed her to be. She isn't simply an orphan with a mysterious history. He broke just long enough for the weight of the moment to settle. She's a Newman. Victoria's knees nearly buckled. No, she rumored. That's insolvable. Victor opened the envelope and removed the documents outside, laying them flat on the table. The words probability of maternity 99.98 were visible indeed from across the room. Claire is your son, Victoria. The sound that escaped Victoria wasn't a laugh, it was commodity far more ruinous. A broken sob ripped from her casket as gashes swamped her eyes. My son, she choked out. I lost my child. I watched her bones. I held her. You were told she failed, Victor said precisely. But that wasn't the verity. Victoria staggered toward the table, her hands shaking as she reached for the papers. Her vision blurred as she read the results again and again, desperately searching for excrescence, a mistake, anything that could falsify what was right in front of her. This can't be real, she rumored. This can't be passing. Claire stood, gashes streaming freely now. All my life, I felt like commodity was missing. Like I didn't belong anywhere. Are you saying you're my mama? Victoria looked at her. Really looked at her. The familiar wind of her jaw. The intensity in her eyes. The stubborn cock of her chin. Effects she had dismissed as coexistence now screamed at her. Oh my God, Victoria rumored. It's you. She reached out, dithered, also pulled her hand back, overwhelmed. Nikki eventually spoke, her voice pulsing. Victoria, I tried to stop this from coming out like this. Victoria turned sprucely. You knew. Gashes slid down Nikki's face. Not at first. But times latterly I set up out. And I was hysterical. Hysterical of what it would do to you. To this family. Victor gripped his jaw. That fear bring us decades. Victoria's wrathfulness burned through the shock. You let me mourn my child for times. You let me believe she was dead. I allowed. I was guarding you, Nikki blubbed. I was wrong. Claire stepped forward, her voice small but steady. Who took me? Who decided my life for me? Victor's eyes darkened. Someone who allowed. They could outthink a Newman. The name he spoke coming transferred chills through the room. Jordan. Nick cursed under his breath. Of course. Victor continued. Jordan orchestrated the entire thing. A false death. Illegal relinquishment papers. She cancelled Claire's identity and reshaped her life. Claire's hands quivered. So everything I knew was a taradiddle. Victoria collapsed into a president, clinging the DNA report to her casket as if it were the only thing keeping her predicated. I missed your first way. Your first words. Your entire knowledge. She broke down fully, gashes soaking the runners. I'm so sorry, she cried. I failed you. Claire knelt beside her, placing a conditional hand over Victoria's. You didn't fail me. You didn't know. Their eyes met, and commodity shifted, an unnoticeable bond eventually snapping into place. I don't know how to do this, Claire admitted. But I want to try. Victoria jounced through gashes. So do I. Victor watched them, his expression undecipherable, but for the briefest moment, commodity-like remorse flitted across his face. This family survives by facing the verity, he said. No matter how painful. Nick crossed his arms. And what happens now? Victor's voice hardened. Now we take back what was stolen. And we make Jordan pay for every time she took from us. The camera would loiter on Victoria and Claire, Mama and son, still holding hands, both crying, both changed ever. Because in Genoa City, the verity no way stays buried. And when it rises, it destroys everything in its path. The house that formerly echoed with arguments, horse laugh, and power struggles now sounded to hold its breath, as if the walls themselves were hysterical of what had just been unleashed. Victoria sat alone in the living room, the DNA brochure resting on the coffee table in front of her like a loaded armament. She hadn't moved in over an hour. The gashes had stopped, but the shock hadn't. Her entire life had just been rewritten. Every memory she had cleaved to, the loss, the grief, the burial that no way made sense, the child she mourned in silence, it was all erected on a taradiddle. And worse, the verity had been living right in front of her for months. Claire. Her son. Victoria pressed her fritters to her tabernacles, trying to undergird her breathing. She had survived commercial wars, hostage situations, backstabbings by suckers and family likewise. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for this. Steps echoed from the hallway. Victoria strengthened. Claire appeared in the doorway, reluctant, doubtful whether she was welcome. She looked different now, no longer just a youthful woman caught in Newman chaos, but a living memorial of everything Victoria had lost. I didn't know where differently to go, Claire said vocally. Your father said you might want space. But I. Victoria looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but focused. No. Don't leave. Claire stepped outside sluggishly. I keep allowing, Claire said, her voice breaking. If I had known sooner, if you had known sooner, would effects have been different? Victoria swallowed hard. Everything would have been different. She signaled for Claire to sit. There was an awkward pause, the kind that exists only between people connected by blood but separated by time. I don't know how to be your mama, Victoria eventually admitted. I know I got the chance. Claire jounced. I don't know how to be someone's son moreover. A fragile smile flitted between them, brief, uncertain, but real. Meanwhile, across city at Crimson Lights, Nick paced back and forth, His phone pressed to his observance. This isn't just about Victoria, he snapped. This is about all of us. Dad sat on this long enough to double-check DNA but not long enough to prepare anyone for the fallout? Phyllis, seated across from him, arched a brow. You're shocked Victor Newman dropped a nuclear lemon with no warning. Nick suffed. I just keep allowing about Claire. She didn't subscribe up for this. Phyllis leaned back. Neither did Victoria. At that moment, Nikki entered, her face pale, her countenance slightly holding together. Sanguine lights fell quiet as a many familiar faces tasted commodity was wrong. Nick stood incontinently. Mama. Nikki's eyes filled with gashes. I do'n't earn your sympathy. Phyllis stood. You should go. This is family. Nikki shook her head. No. I've retired long enough. Nick's voice softened. Why didn't you tell her? Because I watched Victoria fall piecemeal after losing her baby, Nikki rumored. I watched her lose herself. I allowed. If the verity came out latterly, it would destroy her each over again. Nick gripped his jaw. And now? Now I may have destroyed her anyway. Back at the ranch, Victoria eventually picked up the DNA report again. She goggled at the figures, the cold certainty of wisdom that left no room for denial. Jordan, she said plaintively. She stole you from me. Claire's expression darkened. She raised me to believe I was disposable. Interchangeable. Victoria's hands coiled into fists. She doesn't get to walk down from this. Across city, Victor stood in his office at Newman Enterprises, gaping out the window as Adam approached. So it's true, Adam said still. Claire's victorious. Victor jounced. Blood doesn't lie. Adam exhaled sluggishly. That makes her a Newman, Victor finished. Adam's lips tensed. Another heir at law. Victor turned sprucely. This isn't about heritage. Everything in this family is about heritage, Adam shot back. Victor stepped closer, his voice low. Jordan allowed. She could abolish a Newman. She was wrong. Adam dithered. What are you planning? Victor's eyes hardened. Justice. The coming morning, Victoria stood outside the sanitarium tabernacle, unfit to go outside. Memories swamped back. Croakers. Voices, machines. The moment she was told her baby was gone. Claire watched her from a distance, doubtful how to help. Eventually, Victoria spoke. I stood right then times ago. I supplicated for a phenomenon. Her voice cracked. And I walked down allowing God didn't answer me. Claire took a step forward. Perhaps he did. Just late. Victoria turned, gashes streaming freely again, and pulled Claire into her arms. This time, she didn't vacillate. I won't lose you again, she rumored fiercely. In that moment, the bond was sealed. But in Genoa City, peace no way lasts. Away, Jordan sat alone, flipping through a burner phone, a boo lugging at her lips. They know, she muttered. Eventually. She wasn't hysterical. She was ready. Because the verity may have reunited a mama and son, but it had also burned a war that would tear the Newman family piecemeal formally more. And this time, no bone would escape unscathed. The verity didn't settle gently over Genoa City. It moved like a storm that refused to pass, hanging low and heavy over every familiar road, every heritage name, every precisely constructed taradiddle that had formerly felt safe. Once Victor Newman exposed Claire's true identity, nothing in the Newman root could return to its former shape. The disclosure didn't simply add a missing piece to the family mystification, it shattered the frame entirely. Victoria retreated inward during the days that followed, her strength folding under the weight of recollections that no longer made sense. For times, she had erected her identity around survival. She survived loss. She survived treason. She survived the death of a child she believed she'd no way hold again. That grief had come part of her armor, commodity she carried still while conquering boardrooms and overreaching adversaries. Now, that armor felt useless. The grief she had learned to live with was suddenly exposed as gratuitous suffering, manufactured by a taradiddle that stole decades from her life. The DNA results stayed close to her, not because she demanded evidence, but because she demanded grounding. When the world feels fantastic, paper and figures can occasionally anchor the mind. Every time she read the results, the verity struck her again. Claire was enter foreigner. She was enter coexistence. She was meat and blood, a living durability of a story Victoria believed had ended in tragedy. The consummation broke commodity open inside her, commodity raw and willful. Claire, meanwhile, was in a state of emotional suspense. She had lived her entire life seeing a void but no way understanding its shape. Now that void had a name, a face, and a heritage attached to it. She wasn't simply discovering her origins. She was inheriting a history soaked in power, anticipation, and undetermined trauma. Being a Newman wasn't a gift. It was a responsibility that came with unnoticeable chains. As the days passed, Claire began to face reflections of herself in Victoria's habits, her intensity, her restless need for control. These parallels no longer felt accidental. They felt ineluctable. The consummation was both comforting and intimidating. Comforting because she eventually belonged nearly. Intimidating because that belonging came with a once full of damage she didn't yet understand. The Newman family responded in shattered ways, each member recycling the verity through their own injuries. Nick approached the situation with conservative protectiveness, artificially situating himself as a buffer between Claire and the darker aspects of the family heritage. He saw in her the same vulnerability he'd seen in himself at colorful points in his life, and he knew how enduring the Newman name could be to those who weren't prepared for it. Nikki, still, unraveled still. The guilt she had buried for time surfaced with brutal clarity. She had induced herself that silence was mercy, that withholding the verity spared Victoria further pain. But now, watching her son struggle to attune a stolen history with a living present, Nikki could no longer hide behind intention. The damage was real, and it had her fingerprints each over it. Every gash Victoria exfoliate felt like a consequence Nikki could no longer escape. Victor, true to form, refused to sit in remorse for long. He interpreted the disclosure not as a tragedy but as a correction. Commodity stolen had been returned. Commodity hidden had been reclaimed. In his mind, the macrocosm had realigned itself with the Newman order. Yet indeed Victor couldn't ignore the subtle shift in power that came with Claire's actuality. A new heir at law didn't simply expand the family tree, it complicated it. Commitment, birthrights, and long-standing resentments still recalibrated themselves around this new verity. The shadow brewing over everything was Jordan. Her absence felt louder than her presence ever had. Every unanswered question, every falsified document, every missing time traced back to her influence. The consummation that one woman had orchestrated such a massive deception left the Newmans exposed in a way they weren't oriented to. Their wealth and influence hadn't defended them from losing a child. That verity unsettled Victor further than he watched to admit. Victoria's emotional reckoning reached its peak when she eventually allowed herself to suffer actually, not for the son she lost, but for the time she no way lived. She mourned birthdays she missed, mileposts she no way witnessed, and a bond that should have grown naturally rather of being forced into actuality by a lab result. The grief was complicated by stopgap, which made it sharper, more dangerous. Hope meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was commodity Victoria had trained herself to avoid. Claire felt that pressure deeply. She didn't anticipate immediate closeness or unconditional trust. She understood that connections, especially shattered bones, demanded time. What she plodded with was the fear that time itself had formally done irrecoverable damage. How do you make a mama-son relationship when both women are grown-ups shaped by absence? How do you reclaim commodity that should have formed naturally but no way had the chance? The days that followed felt heavier, as though time itself had braked under the weight of what had been revealed. Victoria began to understand that mending would not come in dramatic improvements but in quiet abidance. Every morning she woke with the same consummation, and every morning it felt new again. Claire, for her part, tried to move precisely, apprehensive that indeed small mistakes could renew injuries neither of them knew how to close yet. Around them, the Newman family acclimated their positions, some with caution, others with computation. The verity had shifted the balance, and everyone felt it. What none of them could ignore was the sense that this story was far from finished. Too numerous times were missing. Too numerous opinions had been made in the dark, and nearly beyond their reach. The consequences of those opinions were formally moving, ready to surface when the family least anticipated it.